The cathedral doors don't open for Selene. They open at her father Matteo's hand flat against her spine, steering her forward like cargo. The ceremonial veil is Isabella. The perfume clinging to the lace is Isabella's. The silver bond cuffs waiting at the altar were measured for Isabella's wrists. Establish the crisis fast. Isabella fled at dawn with the son of a rival Alpha. Matteo discovered the empty room, the note, the ruin, and turned to his second daughter, not out of love, out of arithmetic. Selene was the only Ashford bloodline left in the building. Selene's interiority, imposter syndrome in real time. She is not walking, she is being walked. She keeps her chin level and her steps even, cataloguing every reason she is about to die. Kale Nightfang has executed men for lesser deceptions. She smells wrong. She is wearing the wrong woman's veil. The moonflowers in her hair were pinned the night before for a woman currently on an open road. The veil lift, the story's ignition. Kale lifts the veil, silver eyes completely still, one breath too. He doesn't summon a guard, he doesn't expose her. In a voice low enough that only she can hear, he says, "You are not who they sent." And then, before she can collapse or confess or run, he turns to the council elder and says, "I claim her." Time jump days into the marriage. Selene is installed in the Nightfang stronghold. Kale is cold, efficient, present but unreadable. She expects cruelty. She receives distance which, for a woman raised invisible, is almost worse. The Palazzo Lorenzo reveal. A quiet evening. Kale mentions, almost offhand, that he watched her once, 6 months ago at the diplomatic gala. Not Isabella, her, a girl in a faded dress crouched in the dark gardens, splinting the leg of an injured pup. He had already decided even then which Ashford daughter he wanted. The ledger discovery, Selene's turning point. Tasked with auditing the territory's household accounts, no one expects her to actually look. Selene finds the anomaly. Then the pattern. Then the name, Lucian Blackthorn. Her father wasn't drowning in ordinary debt, he was on Blackthorn's payroll, deliberately sabotaging Kale's supply lines. The altar switch wasn't desperate improvisation. It was a designed trap meant to destabilize the marriage from the moment it was made. The sanctuary revelation. Kale shows her his hidden network, safe houses for displaced and broken wolves, funded anonymously for years. The ruthless king the world fears has been quietly keeping the most vulnerable alive. Selene recognizes something she didn't expect, integrity in the same register as her own. Chapter end beat. Blackthorn arrives at the stronghold with a legal challenge and a political smile, and a weeping Isabella. The grand tribunal political climax. Before the council, Blackthorn presents Isabella as proof of fraud. The true promised bride, returned to rightfully dissolve the bonding and strip Kale of his northern title. Isabella weeps beautifully. The room wavers. Selene steps forward. She sets the bound audit ledgers on the council table. She does not raise her voice. She lays out entry by entry her father's bribery payments, Blackthorn's sabotage operation, the manufactured debt, the engineered substitution. Then she delivers the legal kill shot. The bonding contract specified the Ashford bloodline. Not a name, a lineage, she is Ashford. The crown is legally untouchable. Isabella's exit. Isabella opens her mouth. Selene meets her eyes and says simply, "You left." Isabella has no answer. She is escorted from the territory. The emotional climax, the mountain refuge. Alone for the first time since it all broke, Kale takes Selene to his private mountain sanctuary. The fire is low. The political armor is finally off both of them. Selene admits out loud what she has never said to anyone, that she spent her whole life believing she was only the leftover, that even now, part of her waits to be returned. Kale crosses the room. He doesn't speak first, he kneels. He slides his signet ring from his own finger and places it on her thumb. Then he tells her about the gardens at Palazzo Lorenzo, about watching her work in the dark, asking nothing from anyone, certain no one was watching. He was watching, he had always chosen her. Resolution, the balcony, the veil, the burn. The High Council ratifies her crown. Selene stands on the stronghold balcony and looks out at the territory, her territory. Then she crosses to the hearth and drops Isabella's old lace veil into the fire. She doesn't watch it burn with grief, she watches it burn with finality. She is not a substitute, she is not a spare. She is the lunar not by rescue, not by accident, but because she earned it ledger line by ledger line in the firelit. The cathedral doors did not open for Selene Ashford. They opened at her. Her father's hand was flat against her spine, not guiding her, not steadying her, pushing her. The way you push something heavy that does not want to move. The way you push something you are ashamed of but cannot afford to waste. Matteo Ashford had not looked his daughter in the eye once that morning. Not when he yanked the veil down over her face in the back of the carriage. Not when he hissed at her to stand straight. Not when the cathedral came into view and Selene's entire body went cold. He just kept his hand on her back and pushed. The nave was enormous. Stone walls, stone floors, stone everything, the kind of building that was designed to make a person feel small. Hundreds of faces turned toward her the moment she crossed the threshold. Wolves in formal dress, elders with silver chains across their chests, council members with sharp eyes that missed nothing. They had all come to witness the bonding of Alpha King Cale Nightfang to the eldest Ashford daughter. What they were getting was the second one. Selene kept her chin level. She kept her steps even. She counted the floor tiles passing beneath her feet because that was the only thing her brain could hold on to right now. 1, 2, 3, 4. Because if she stopped counting and started thinking, she would fall apart right here in front of all of them, and she could not afford that either. The veil was Isabella. The perfume soaked into the lace was Isabella's, that heavy, sweet vanilla that Selene had always privately found a little suffocating. The ceremonial cloak draped over her shoulders was Isabella's, taken in hastily at the waist by their mother's shaking hands in the carriage, safety pins biting into the fabric in 3 places, because there had not been enough time to do it properly. The moonflowers pinned in Selene's hair had been arranged the night before for a different woman. Everything she was wearing had been meant for someone else. That had always been the story of her life. Isabella Ashford had not left a dramatic note. She had not left any note at all. She had simply been gone when the house woke up, her bed empty, her travel bag missing, and a faint trail of hoofprints in the soft mud outside the east garden wall that told the rest of the story well enough. She had run off with the youngest son of the Voss line, a boy she had been meeting in secret for the better part of 2 seasons, a boy whose family was a sworn rival to the Nightfang territory. She had chosen him and she had gone, and she had left the Ashford house standing in the ruins of a bonding agreement with the most feared Alpha King in the northern lands. Selene had woken up to her mother crying and her father already in crisis mode, already calculating, already looking at her the way a man looks at a spare tire. Not what he wanted, not what he planned for, but what was sitting right there when everything else fell apart. She had said no. She had said it twice, actually. The first time quietly and the second time with her voice cracking down the middle because she was not a fool. She knew exactly what awaited the woman who tried to deceive Cale Nightfang. The stories about him were not soft stories. They were the kind that made grown men go quiet. 3 rival alphas had challenged his claim to the northern territories over the last decade, and none of them had come back the same. He had never once raised his voice in a council session because he had never needed to. The entire room dropped to silence the second he walked in. He was not a man who got tricked. He was not a man who forgave deception. And her father wanted her to walk down the aisle wearing her sister's veil and her sister's perfume, and stand at that altar and hope that somehow, Cale Nightfang would not notice he had been handed the wrong daughter. She had said no, twice. And then her father had looked at her with dry eyes and told her that if the bonding agreement collapsed, the Blackthorn creditors would move on the family estate within the week. That her mother's health was already fragile and would not survive the disgrace. That the Ashford name, the only thing they had left after years of bad debt and worse decisions, would be ground to nothing. He did not say he was sorry. He did not say he would find another way. He just laid all of it out on the table in front of her and waited because he already knew what Selene would do. She had always been the one who stayed, the one who fixed things, the one who held the pieces together quietly while Isabella got to be bright and beautiful and free. So here she was, counting floor tiles, 1, 2, 3, 4. The altar was closer now. She could see the elder standing at the center, his ceremonial robes deep charcoal, his face unreadable. She could see the silver bond cuffs resting on the altar stone, which had been measured and fitted for Isabella's wrists, and would probably cut into hers if anyone tried to close them. And she could see him. Cale Nightfang stood at the left of the altar, slightly angled toward the aisle, completely still. That was the first thing that struck her, the stillness. He was not fidgeting, not scanning the room, not performing patience. He simply existed in that space the way stone exists, like he had always been there and always would be. He was broad across the shoulders, dark-haired, dressed in deep charcoal and black with the Nightfang sigil pressed in silver at his collar. His face was composed. Severe almost, but not cruel, just utterly, quietly unreadable. His eyes found her the moment she cleared the last row of seats. Silver, she had heard that about him too, but hearing it and seeing it were two entirely different things. They were not soft silver, not gentle. They were the color of a blade in low light, and they did not waver and they did not move off her face once. Seleni's feet kept moving because her father's hand was still at her back, because stopping now would be its own kind of disaster, because she had come this far and there was no road back. Her lungs felt like they had shrunk to half their size. The floor tiles blurred a little. She reached the altar. The elder began the formal greeting words, the old bonding language, low and rhythmic, the kind of words that had been spoken at altars like this one for centuries. Selene heard them from somewhere far away, underwater almost, her whole body concentrated on the single fact of Kale Nightfang standing 3 feet in front of her. He had not looked away, not once. Then he reached forward and he lifted the veil. The air in the cathedral shifted. Selene felt it, that collective inhale, 200 people drawing breath at the same moment. Maybe they saw her face and recognized she was not Isabella. Maybe they were simply watching a king look at his bride for the first time. Kale looked at her. One breath, too. The elder's words slowed and then stopped. There was a particular quality to that silence, the kind that could turn into anything, accusation, outrage, humiliation, and Selene stood very still inside it, hands cold, waiting for what was coming. What came was not what she expected. Kale leaned forward just slightly, just enough that his voice reached her and no one else. Low and even and absolutely certain, the same way the rest of him was certain. "You are not who they sent." 3 words and her whole body turned to water. She wanted to explain. She wanted to apologize. She wanted to tell him all of it, Isabella, and the Voss boy and the estate debt and her father's hand on her back, and the safety pins holding her sister's cloak together at the waist. She did not get the chance. Kale straightened. He turned to the elder, and in a voice that was quiet but carried all the way to the stone walls and back, he said, "I claim her." No hesitation, no qualifier, no question, just that. The elder blinked. Somewhere behind Selene, she heard a sharp inhale that was probably her father, probably relief, which made her feel sick. The council members stirred in their seats. Kale did not look at any of them. He was still looking at her. Selene stood at that altar, bones hollow, veil hanging from one hand, heart slamming against her ribs, and understood, with the kind of certainty that settles in your chest and does not move, that she had just been claimed by the most dangerous man in the northern lands. She did not know yet whether that was salvation or a different kind of trap. She was not sure in that moment whether there was any difference. The Alpha King claimed her instantly after she was manipulated to take her sister's place. Chapter 3: The Crown She Earned. The Grand Tribunal chamber smelled like cold stone and old authority. It was a circular room, deliberately so, no head of the table, no single seat of power, just the council elder at the center arc and 12 seated members fanned out on either side, all of them in formal charcoal robes. All of them with the particular expression of people who had been pulled into something they had not anticipated and were not entirely sure how to hold. Selene walked in carrying the ledger. Not clutching it, not hiding it under her arm the way you hide something you are not sure of. She carried it flat against her chest, spine out, the way you carry something you intend to use. Kale walked 1 step to her left and slightly behind, not in front of her, not steering her, just there. Present in the way a wall is present, solid and certain, not demanding anything from the space but absolutely occupying it. Lucian Blackthorn was already seated at the petitioner's ark, and he looked exactly the way she had always imagined he would look in a room like this. Polished, comfortable, the kind of man who had rehearsed his confidence so many times it had become indistinguishable from the real thing. He was handsome in a calculated way, dark-suited with a smile that sat on his face like a piece of furniture, placed there deliberately and never quite belonging. And beside him, in a chair slightly angled away from his, as if she were already distancing herself from what was about to happen, sat Isabella. Selene had not seen her sister since before the wedding morning. She looked the same. Of course she did. Isabella always looked the same, beautiful in that effortless, infuriating way, dark hair loose over her shoulders, eyes red-rimmed from crying that Selene could not immediately determine was genuine or performed. She was wearing something soft and pale, the color of an apology, and when her eyes found Selene across the chamber they held something complicated in them. Not quite guilt. Not quite defiance, something exhausted and unresolved sitting right in between. Selene held her gaze for exactly 1 second. Then she looked away because she had work to do and Isabella was not the work. The elder called the session to order. Blackthorn did not waste time. He rose, smoothed his jacket, and presented his case with the practiced ease of a man who believed he had already won. The bonding contract, he said, had specified Isabella Ashford by name as the intended mate. What stood at that altar was not Isabella Ashford. The bonding was therefore fraudulent, the claim invalid, and under council law, a fraudulent bonding nullified the Alpha's territorial authority, pending a formal review that Blackthorn was very helpfully prepared to oversee himself. He said all of this pleasantly, reasonably, like he was doing everyone in the room a favor. 2 of the council members were already leaning toward each other, murmuring. Selene watched their faces and recognized the specific look of people being convinced, the way a current moves, slowly, then all at once. Blackthorn gestured to Isabella. Isabella rose. Her voice came out soft and cracked at the edges, and she told the council that she had been the promised bride, that circumstances had made her flee, that she had returned because she believed the right thing was to correct the record and allow the council to make a proper determination. She did not look at Selene while she said it. The elder nodded, made a note, and turned to the Nightfang side of the chamber. Selene stepped forward before anyone could speak for her. She set the ledger on the presentation table in the center of the room. She opened it to the first marked page. She did not raise her voice because she did not need to. She had learned something from watching Kale these past days, that the people who never needed to raise their voices were the ones the room always ended up listening to. She walked the council through it entry by entry. The first payment from Blackthorn to the Ashford accounts, 11 months ago. The supply invoices that did not match deliveries. The 3 account lines used to move money invisibly. The escalating amounts that tracked precisely alongside the escalating disruptions to Kale's northern supply chains. The paper trail that led, cleanly and without ambiguity, from Lucian Blackthorn's operation directly into Matteo Ashford's hands. Her father had not been a desperate man making a desperate choice. He had been a paid operative. The debt was manufactured leverage. The altar switch was not a panicked improvisation. It was the final piece of a trap designed to install a fraudulent bond, destabilize Kale's title, and hand Blackthorn the grounds he needed to trigger exactly this tribunal. The chamber had gone very quiet. Selene turned to the last marked page. She kept her voice level and her hands steady, and she delivered the piece she had been saving. The bonding contract, she said, did not specify Isabella Ashford by name. She had read it herself 3 times in Kale's study the night before. It specified a daughter of the Ashford bloodline, not a name, a lineage. She was Selene Ashford. She was standing here, legally bonded, a daughter of that bloodline without question. The contract was valid. The crown was untouchable. She closed the ledger. One of the senior council members reached forward and pulled it toward him. He opened it. He read. He passed it to the member on his left without a word. Blackthorn had stopped smiling. He tried to recover. He made a procedural argument, something about the spirit of the contract versus the letter of it, something about the intent of both parties at the time of signing. His voice had a new quality in it now, not panic exactly, but the early warning sound of a man who can feel the ground moving under him and is trying to find his footing before anyone notices. The elder cut him off, not unkindly but completely. Selene looked at Isabella. Isabella was looking down at her hands in her lap. Her shoulders were pulled in. She looked, for the first time that Selene could ever remember, small. Selene crossed the few feet between them and stood in front of her sister. Isabella looked up, those red-rimmed eyes, that exhausted, complicated expression. Selene did not say all the things she could have said. She did not list the morning she had spent in the back of a carriage with safety pins in her sister's dress digging into her ribs. She did not describe what it felt like to walk down that aisle counting floor tiles just to keep herself from dissolving. She did not talk about their father, about what she had found in those ledgers, about all the quiet ways this family had spent her without asking. She said 2 words. You left. Isabella's mouth opened. Nothing came out, because there was nothing to say to that. It was not an accusation. It was not even anger, though the anger was there underneath it, patient and old. It was just the plain, simple truth of it, laid out between them with nowhere to hide. Isabella looked away first. The elder delivered the counsels, finding 20 minutes later. The documentation of treason presented by the Lunar was sufficient to refer both Lucian Blackthorne and Matteo Ashford to the High Council for formal criminal proceedings. The bonding contract, reviewed in full, specified Ashford bloodline. The bond stood. The crown stood. Blackthorne was escorted from the chamber by 2 Nightfang guards, and the composure finally left his face when they took his arms. Just for a moment. Just long enough for Selene to see what was underneath all that polished certainty, something small and mean, and genuinely surprised that it had lost. Isabella left quietly without a scene, which was somehow the saddest part of the whole thing. Selene watched her go and felt the grief of it move through her like weather, present, real, and then passing. You could love someone and still let them walk out. You could grieve a relationship and still know that what you had built here was worth more than what had been taken from you there. She had learned that, she was still learning it. The mountain sanctuary was 2 hours north of the stronghold, tucked into the tree line where the eastern ridge curved and the wind came down clean and cold off the peaks. Cale brought her there that same evening, after the chamber had emptied and the formal proceedings had concluded, and the stronghold had settled into the particular quiet that follows something enormous. The refuge was simple inside. Stone hearth, low wooden furniture, the smell of pine and wood smoke, and something that had been cooking earlier and left a warmth in the air even now. It was nothing like the stronghold's formal rooms. It felt like somewhere a person actually lived. Selene sat by the fire and felt the day move through her in slow waves. The chamber, the ledger, Isabella's face, the 2 words, all of it settling and resettling. Cale sat across from her, close enough that the firelight reached both of them. He was not elsewhere tonight. He was completely, quietly here. She said it before she could talk herself out of it. I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. He looked at her steadily. All right. Was this ever? She stopped, started again. Am I here because I was useful? Because I walked into that cathedral at the right moment and it turned out I was more convenient to keep than to send back? She hated that she had to ask. She hated more that she needed the answer. Cale was quiet for a long moment. Not the quiet of someone buying time, but the quiet of someone who takes the truth seriously enough to make sure they are holding it correctly before they hand it over. Then he stood up, crossed the space between them, and knelt down in front of her chair. Not beside it, in front of it. Cale Nightfang, the Alpha King, the man who had emptied rooms without raising his voice, on his knees on a stone floor in a firelit room with no audience and no performance and nothing to prove to anyone. He reached up and pulled the signet ring from his own finger. The Nightfang seal, heavy dark metal, the ring that every document of territory authority bore his mark from. He took her left hand and slid it onto her thumb, because it was too large for any other finger, and he held her hand in both of his and looked at her with those silver eyes that were not cold at all when you were close enough to see them clearly. 6 months ago, he said, I stood on a terrace in the dark and watched you take your hem apart to help something small that was hurting. You did not know anyone was watching. That is who you are when no one is watching. He paused. That is who I wanted beside me, not the one they offered, not the one they dressed up and presented. You. Selene's throat ached. The throne means nothing, he said, without your fire beside it. I knew that before I ever learned your name. The fire shifted and settled in the hearth. Outside, the wind came down off the ridge and moved through the trees, and the world was very large and very quiet all at once. She looked at the ring on her thumb, heavy and real and chosen. She had spent her entire life being the backup plan, the spare, the one who stayed while everyone else got to leave and be wanted and be chosen. She had held so many things together for so many people who never once asked if she was all right, who looked through her the way you look through a window, useful for the light it lets in, invisible itself. And this man had watched her in the dark and chosen her before he ever had a reason to. She let out a breath she felt like she had been holding since the carriage that morning, weeks ago, when her father's hand pressed flat against her spine and pushed her toward a life she had not asked for. She was not pushed anymore. 3 days later, the High Council ratified the crown. It was a formal ceremony, much smaller than the bonding, just the elder and the senior members and the witnesses required by law. Selene stood in the great hall of the Nightfang stronghold in her own dress, not Isabella's, not borrowed, not safety-pinned into someone else's shape, and received the formal words of ratification and felt them land differently than she expected. Not like a weight, like a door opening. Afterward, she went to the hearth in the upper hall alone. She had kept the veil, not out of sentiment. She had kept it because she knew she was going to do this, and she wanted to do it properly, with intention, not in a moment of anger but in a moment of clarity. She held it for just a second. The heavy lace, the faint trace of vanilla still in the fabric somehow, the moonflower stems gone brittle and brown, all that weight, all that borrowed identity, all those years of being the one the shape was never quite cut for. She let it drop into the fire. It caught immediately, the lace going fast and bright, and Selene watched it burn without flinching. Not with grief, not with bitterness, with the clean, settled feeling of a person who has finally put down something heavy and does not intend to pick it back up. She was still standing there when Cale came to stand beside her. He did not say anything, he did not need to. She looked out through the high window at the end of the hall, at the Nightfang territory spreading out below the stronghold, the eastern ridge, the forest edge where his sanctuaries sat quiet and full of the people he had kept alive in secret. Her territory now, her people now. The veil finished burning. Selene turned from the hearth and walked to the window and looked out at all of it, the land, the lights below, the long reach of everything that was now hers to protect. And she stood there in her own dress with his ring on her thumb, and she was not a substitute, not a spare, not the wrong daughter or the backup plan or the girl being pushed through a door. She was the lunar. She had not been rescued into it. She had not stumbled into it by accident. She had earned it. Line by careful line, in firelit rooms, in quiet work, in the particular stubborn dignity of a woman who had been underestimated her entire life, and had finally, completely, stopped agreeing with the people who had done the underestimating. The ash settled in the hearth behind her. Selene looked out at her kingdom and did not look back.